Hello everyone. Welcome to the Developer DAO workshop. My name is Yashkak, and I'm from India. And over here with me is Nare David. He is Devrel at Celestia. Developer DAO organizes these workshops to spread education among the community. First, we were used to have these workshops in the Discord server, and now it's going on on the mainstream for the YouTube to spread the knowledge among the community. Then it would be good, like if you introduce yourself to the community.
Yes. Thank you so much for the intro. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here talking about Lens Protocol and building social media applications with Lens. And today I'm going to be giving a two-part kind of like workshop. The first part is going to be a slide deck introduction to Lens. And then the second part is going to be building out a basic application where we read the data from the API, we render out the users, and then we create a view that allows you to drill down and see the details of a individual user on the social graph and then follow that user.
Yeah,
And that should be hopefully a nice introduction to kind of get people familiar with just the workflow and what it would look like to build on Lens.
that would be awesome. Like a decentralized social media graph, that's an awesome tool. So yeah,
So yeah, do we have
so
comments or anything that? Okay, cool. I see some comments. Good morning, everyone.
yeah, good morning everyone. TM. So I hope I got your Twitter handle right.
Yeah, everything's great. So, what do you think we should do? Should we go ahead and kick it off, or do we have any? Do we want to take any
um,
questions or anything?
Yeah, like for the start, I've recently seen saw a tweet regarding the lens protocol. Like you are building some stuff, you are asking for the lens profile IDs, right? So,
Yes,
would you like to give some insights about it first? That would be
for
awesome.
sure. I think one of the exciting things about building on top of these Web3 protocols is that the data, as well as all of the code and all of the actual infrastructure, is completely open for anyone to use. When we think about traditional social media applications, most of the time the company that created the application controls the front end and they control the back end, meaning that they are just building out like this full stack application and they
Yeah,
control like how people experience that. And if you try to build on their API, you can often, get
yeah,
started doing pretty basic things, but you can't truly feel like you have the same level of ownership to build out user interfaces because they control the API. So if you're doing something better or if you're drawing users away, they could change that in order to kind of prevent that
right,
because their monetization has to do for the most part through their user interface through advertising and stuff. Um, but with blockchain protocols, the backends are completely open and permissionless. Anyone can use them,
right,
anyone can build upon them. So one of the most interesting things with like that concept being applied in the real world is I think social graphs, because it's one thing to build on top of DeFi protocols and NFT marketplaces, which are cool. But I think the large majority of people around the world are probably less interested in that than something like a
yeah,
social graph, because social graphs are
right,
used by billions of people every day, like TikTok,
yeah,
Instagram. All of these are social graph applications. What Lens has done is they've kind of like taken the idea of a social graph, built it into a smart contract, and then they've enabled
right,
a few interesting things like gasless transactions and also a dispatcher to kind of improve the user experience. And the idea that I tweeted out is essentially taking a few of the primitives that Lens enables and applying them to build out some type of community possibly with that. This is more of like, well, let me kind of go into how I guess Lens works. So when you follow someone, you're
yeah,
giving an NFT for that person that you follow.
yeah,
What you can then do with that is you can say, I want to build out applications that allow access to only people that follow me. And then you could say, hey,
yeah,
I'm doing this thing. And if you want to attend, you can follow me and then you can get access. So like the general idea is I'm going to build something that kind of leverages those follower NFTs. Like if they're following
nice,
me, then they'll be able to kind of participate in this thing. And I have yet to kind of announce or talk more in depth about what that is, but it's going to have something to do with
Right.
like in real life events because I do quite a few of those. And it's just a fun application, a fun project to build.
Yeah, like this is one of the like real most use cases I've seen over in the in the blockchain and the protocols which we are currently have. And like as you have told us about the NFT follow NFT, so there was also an option for like when you want to follow someone you have to pay them, right? I've seen that option in the lens. So it's like for monetization for the creators also that's an also an awesome tool to be honest.
Yeah, so you can do that. You can have configurations set up to where you can only follow me if this logic proves to be true. One of those things would be to pay. So you might say, okay, to follow me, it's going to cost you like 50 cents or a dollar. Or someone I followed today, it costs 5 Matic to follow them, which is like $4 or so. I thought that was cool. I was like, they're following me, and they have a decent network, and I have extra Matic, so I followed them, and they have like 30 or 40 followers, so they made a few $100s just by you know and the way you could think about that is like if you subscribe to a newsletter sometimes you might pay, or if you want to subscribe to like a publication you might pay for that, or you might want
Right.
to just choose to support someone that's doing great things in the community, and via the platform you have that basically opportunity built in. You can also do stuff though, like I can say unless you're following um, at least 3 out of these 10 people that I really think are valuable, then you can't follow me. And like, there's just all
Right.
types of stuff you can do. So like, it's not really limited to just that, but there's quite a bit of cool stuff that you can do.
That's awesome then. So, in the comments, if you see, like, there's a caution for Celestia, and yep. And other than that, GM.
Yes, there's a question about Celestia.
Yeah. So let me just show you
Oh,
down.
can you
Can talk
talk about
about
Celestia?
Celestia.
Yeah, so this talk is mainly about Lens, but I would be happy to talk about Celestia. Celestia is uh, essentially the first modular blockchain network, and there's a lot of details and nuance that kind of go into what that actually means. But to kind of be to distill the main importance about what that would mean, I guess, would be that it enables more scalability and it also
Right.
enables sovereignty. So the two main characteristics or the two main improvements or benefits of building in that way is scalability and sovereignty. So the implementation of separating the core components of a blockchain um,
Right.
in a way that we've done with Celestia, and Celestia only handles the data availability and consensus, is that it enables
Right.
really very inexpensive uh, blocks. So with most blockchains, as the usage grows, the price of storage grows because the block
Right.
size is kind of limited. But with Celestia, the block size can continue to increase along with usage without having an inconsistent pricing mechanism. So as the block sizes increase, the price doesn't increase. Also, it enables like scalability in other ways that I won't kind of like go into here. But I have a good interview, I think, that I would recommend. It's with Mustafa, who's the founder of Celestia, on Delphi Digital, and I think it's called Disruptors. So just search for
Yeah.
Disruptors, Mustafa, Celestia. That's the best, I think, introduction um, in an audible way. And then if you want to read a good blog
Right.
post about Celestia, I would check out Pay Attention to Celestia.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I guess it's a good time to start the like the whole workshop thing. So
Sure.
definitely, yeah.
Okay,
Share your
cool. Someone
screen.
asked
That
about a
would be
lens
awesome.
handle. I tweeted something out
Yeah.
yesterday to drop your lens handle, and I also created a tweet below that that is asking for people that don't have a lens handle to request one. I'm working with the lens team on everyone responding there to actually get them a lens handle. So I would say respond to that tweet and let's see if we can get you a lens handle.
Cool. We will put out the tweet link over here in the comments for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, so it's okay if I go ahead and start sharing my
Yeah,
screen,
that
I
would be
guess.
good.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be good.
All right. Can you see this?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So my talk is going to be a combination of an introduction to Lens and then a workshop where we actually write some code. So what is Lens? Lens is a composable and decentralized social graph. A social graph is an application that allows users to do the things that we're kind of probably used to doing in most of the widely used applications today, be it a social media app like TikTok or Instagram, or even something like YouTube, or believe it or not, even things like Stack Overflow and GitHub, where we create profiles, we follow other people, we create some form of content, we can view a feed of that content, and then typically what else is part of this, a big part of this, is the recommendation algorithm. The recommendation algorithm will present you with compelling information to hopefully get you to stick around and be part of that application as your day to day basis or on a day to day basis. A lot of the
Right.
social media apps are actually notorious for being too sticky and almost making people addicted to them. And those are mainly due to how they've programmed their recommendation algorithms along with notifications. So, what are examples of social graphs? I mentioned a couple already, but four of the most popular ones today would probably be these: TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. So let's first, before we talk about what Lens is, talk about some of the downsides of how social networks work today and maybe how Lens might be able to improve upon this. First of all, the data and the network are siloed and they're controlled by a single entity. One of the best examples of why this is important is that in the past, a long time ago, Twitter used to have a very, very good API that anyone could use and anyone could build on. And literally, people built multi-million dollar businesses on top of Twitter's API because it was so good and it had so much useful information about it. But what ended up happening was that Twitter realized that a lot of value was being extracted out of the platform, and therefore they closed their API and they changed it and made it very limited. So companies literally went out of business, and a big thing that was learned through that whole scenario that people have taken with them since then is that it's very, very risky to build on top of other people's APIs. Period. Um, Especially when you're talking about something like a social media platform that isn't positioned as an API as a service. Because anytime that something happens that they want to change, you have no control over that. And they can do that without your permission, and they will do that. And often, it will change the business model of the thing that you're building. So if you think that building a business on top of someone else's API is kind of like a good idea, it's one of those things that you probably won't be able to sleep good at night because it's not the greatest idea. Advertising is a big part of social media today, and the way that advertising works is through what you could call um, data harvesting. They're literally just taking everything they can possibly get about you and using that to target you with advertising, but also often to spread that information across other networks as well and target you there as well. In addition to that, often this information that they store about you is leaked, and there are a lot of negative consequences that come from that. So we're not just talking about the advertising model; we're talking about all the things that come along with that: the tracking, the data harvesting, and all of those things that are not good. The recommendation algorithms are completely closed off. Like, we don't know how these things work, and often the things that happen, I think, in these recommendation algorithms are almost predatory. And there's a reason they don't want you knowing how they're showing your content, because it might make a lot of people like not very happy. There's also a lot of censorship that happens with social networks. And I don't know if I would call this a downside. I would say this is potentially a downside, potentially a good thing, depending on like what's being censored, obviously. But I don't think it's makes a lot of sense for the protocol or the actual application itself to be in charge of this censorship. I think what we're seeing with Web3 is that you have the opportunity to enable people in parts of the world like in the Middle East or in China or in Ukraine that have to deal with censorship that it affects their actual like livelihood. Um, to be able to not be censored and instead let client applications decide on what needs to be shown and what doesn't need to be shown, but the actual information is still there. And I think that's a huge thing. Also, I know a lot of people that have just had their social media presence completely wiped out, either due to living in the wrong country. Like, again, I know someone in China that had a large YouTube following, wasn't doing anything crazy, but the government did not like maybe whatever he was doing, and just completely had his channel shut down, and a lot of his livelihood was like revenue that was coming through that. So essentially, the idea is that Web3 protocols would be more censorship resistant. I mentioned the whole like data network, and that also has to do with the closed APIs, but also the APIs are just brittle. You know, like information and things can change without you knowing, and therefore your application doesn't work anymore. And then the monetization of all of the social media applications is obviously platform first. The companies are billion-dollar companies, maybe even trillion-dollar companies, and their number one goal is to bring in as much revenue for their shareholders as possible, and they don't really care about anything other than that. They'll skirt all of the laws and do whatever they possibly can to make it to where they can maximize profit. So with that being said, what exactly is Lens protocol? Lens is a set of smart contracts, and it has already been deployed on Polygon, but you can actually just fork these smart contracts and deploy them anywhere yourself. So you don't necessarily have to use the current deployment. You can fork it and make some updates and deploy it yourself if you would like. But for the deployment that they have on Polygon, they've also built out a really nice API layer that is developer first, I would say. And it's not only easy to use for kind of like traditional Web3 developers or blockchain developers that already know how to do all this stuff. They also have made it very approachable to traditional web developers by creating a nice GraphQL API. So what we're going to look at in just a moment is how easy it is to just get started with this by creating a GraphQL query, and you're communicating with this backend just like it's a traditional Web2 backend. They've also implemented gasless transactions, which to me are a hugely important thing, I think, in general for adoption, not only for Lens, but for the entire Web3 ecosystem, because the barrier to entry just to get tokens for the average person around the world is a lot higher than maybe we realize. Because for me, in the United States, I have money and I have a good I have a good financial infrastructure. I can just go to my bank, deposit some money and then transfer it into Coinbase and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, this is not really an easy thing to do for most people. And therefore, they can't actually use any of these Web3 applications that require tokens. With gasless transactions, though, there is a intermediary that pays the transaction cost, and all you need to do is sign a transaction, and then the actual relayer takes that signed transaction and pays whatever gas. So the gas is still being paid, but it's being paid by a relayer. They also have something called a dispatcher that allows you to interact with the application without having to sign every transaction. One of the things that sucks the most about Web3 user interfaces is that every time you take any little action, you have to keep signing over and over and over. A dispatcher allocates a certain amount of gas and then allows you to use that gas without having to sign every single time, which is a really nice user experience. And they've had kind of this developer-focused go-to-market, which makes a lot of sense. They built Lens protocol as a protocol. They didn't build the front end and launch the front end like Twitter and most of these other social media apps. Instead, they built the smart contracts and the API, and they let everyone else build the front ends on top of it. So what ends up happening here is that you now have literally dozens of different mobile and web applications that are competing to build out the best experience on the front end. And you have people building out all types of developer tooling and stuff to kind of facilitate that and make that even easier. So we don't just have to choose a single front end. We can say, oh, I like this front end better or that front end better. And then maybe someone will come out with something new that's even better. And even more importantly, because the protocol is agnostic to the type of content that's being built there, people are building out not only the same things over and over, they're kind of building out new things. So you have a YouTube clone type of application, you have a TikTok type of application, you have a Twitter type of application, and all these are built on the same backends. And if you are a user and you build out an audience on one of these front ends, you have your users that follow you across all the different other back ends. I'm sorry, all the other different front ends. So if I build 1,000 followers on Lenster, when someone builds out LensTube, which also exists, I now have those 1,000 followers there. So when I post a video, it shows up to all of those people, which to me is like really, really cool. So protocol is built on three main pillars: composability, community governance, and modularity. And with these three pillars, or these are kind of like three major concepts that everything else kind of, I would say, flows from, and their design decisions and just general decisions within the protocol. So
Yeah. So
yes,
we have a question over there in the comments. Like, you would like to have it right now or later?
we'll take this one question and then we'll stop after the presentation is over and take a few more questions.
Go.
Yeah. So what's the question?
Is the gas then paid through every relayer by the organization who sets up the app?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. So Lens protocol itself has set up a relayer that anyone can use. That you have to be whitelisted to use it, or you can actually set up your own relayer and build out your own front end and only allow people like using your front end to use that relayer. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that.
Cool. So
And if you want to learn how to build out your own relayer, I have a GitHub repo, dabbit3 slash, I'm sorry, github.com/dabbit3. It's using Biconomy. I would check that out. Anyway, so yeah, there's two main ways for you to build as a developer. One is that you can just use the APIs that have been already built for you by the Lens team. And again, this is like a GraphQL API that you can just grab and use. And it's really, really easy to get up and running with. You can, in addition to using the APIs, interact with the protocol itself. Like if you wanted to call the smart contract calls, you could do that. And then the other way would be to fork and deploy it yourself. So there's two main reasons why you might want to do this. One, you want to deploy this on a different network than Polygon. You might want to use Optimism, or you might want to build this on something like Arbitrum Nova or whatever. You could do that. You also might want to change something about the protocol. So you might want to say, okay, I don't like this functionality. I want to do something different. So that would be another reason that you would do that. But for the most part, people are just building on the Polygon deployment because it has a built-in user base and it has a built-in data graph. So when I talk about composability, we have, like I mentioned, dozens of front ends that have been built on top of it. You have Orb, which is a really nice mobile app that was just released not too long ago. You have Favor, which is another nice mobile app. You have Lenster, which is a client-side web application that works on web and mobile. And you have all these other types of applications. You even have a YouTube type of application, which is called LensTube, that looks like this. And the cool thing about it again is, like, I had never used LensTube before, but I went to their site and signed in, and I already had my 1,200 followers because I had already grown that follower base somewhere else. So again, this follower base follows you around everywhere. And I have now posted one video actually on LensTube. So I now have one video there. So that's kind of like the composability aspect. So let's look at some code and start diving into a little bit more technical stuff. So Lens protocol, like I mentioned, is just a set of smart contracts. And the two main contracts that you'll probably interact with if you're going to be building from a front-end application interacting with the protocol itself would be the proxy and the actual implementation of Lens protocol, which is Lens Hub. The proxy is just the address that you're going to use to call, and then the Lens Hub is going to be where you're going to get the ABIs and all of the different contract functions that are available. Now, these are documented, obviously, maybe in Etherscan, but they're even really much more well documented in the Lens documentation. So you can actually go to the documentation and see all of the different functions that are available. We'll take a look at those in just a second. But yeah, this is kind of what the Lens Hub looks like. It just has all of the different other contracts like imported, and then you're able to interact with it from there. So let's take a look at a few of the functions that are available. And these are the contract functions that you'll interact with directly if you choose to do so, and you don't choose to use their API. But you have things like that just make a lot of sense, like posting, commenting. You have this idea of mirroring, which is almost like retweeting. You have follow, you have collect, you have all these different ways that you can interact. And then you have view functions, and these are just like reading, reading information. So getting a profile or getting a publication, etc. But more importantly, and to me, the one of the reasons that it's become so successful, I think, with developers is their GraphQL API, because instead of having to interact with the contract and deal with the limitations of that, they have essentially indexed all of the data off of the protocol and made it available in this really nice GraphQL API. So you can now say stuff like, oh, I want to explore publications. I want to sort by this criteria. I want to return these types of publications, and I want to get this many back. And to make it even better with GraphQL, you have the option to define the return values and only return certain types of information, which is really important, I think, when you're dealing with latency issues and building like mobile applications. So this is kind of like a mobile first API approach, which is really great. So I can say for my main view, I only want to return the title and the description for a publication. And then when we drill down into the details, I might want to then expose things like the number of likes and who's liked it and all those other things. And that is really easy to do with GraphQL because you can reuse the same query and just define the return information as different return data. So let's take a look at some of the major concepts in Lens. The first one is a profile. When we talk about user information in Web3, people often say, oh, you own your own data. But in reality, you don't really actually own anything because your information is tied to your address. So when I go to a DeFi exchange and I make a transaction, that transaction is recorded on the blockchain. That data is there forever. I can't really do anything with it. So in reality, anything on chain, I wouldn't say is owned by anyone. It's just there and you can't delete it. It's just, that's just what it is. But I think what Lens has done with their profiles actually brings this idea of ownership to life because everything revolves around not your address, but around a profile that is an NFT that is associated with your address that you can then transfer and sell if you like to. So what this basically means is when you create a profile, you have this profile NFT. Anytime you make a comment or you do any interaction, it's associated with this profile. If you then want to transfer this profile or burn it or sell it or anything, you actually have ownership of that. You can do that. So it's true ownership. You have true control over it. You can get rid of it. You can burn it. You can transfer it or sell it or whatever. And just like any NFT, you can go to some NFT Explorer or you can go to OpenSea and you can actually see a Lens metadata and stuff. And if you don't have a Lens profile, you can actually go and buy one off of OpenSea, and it's not that expensive. Now, you don't have to do that. You can actually get one for free. There's a few different ways to do that. If you're a Developer DAO member, I think you're whitelisted. But like if you did want to buy one, it's not that expensive. I think it's like a few dollars right now to buy a profile. Profiles also have this cool idea of a follow module, which allows you, I think we talked about this earlier, it allows you to configure some type of business logic that will say whether or not someone can follow you. So if you have no follow module, anyone can follow you, but you might want to say something like only people that follow, like these people can follow me, or you can't follow me if you also follow this person, or you have to pay me money to follow me, all types of stuff. You might even transfer like something to them. I don't know if they follow you. I haven't explored all of those different possibilities, but the possibilities I talked about at first are all actually already being done today. You also, in addition to having a profile, you have this idea of a publication, and this is just basically a post. And there are three main types of posts, of publications, I guess you could say: posts, comments, and mirrors. A post is a new piece of content. A comment is a publication associated with a post, and a mirror means you're kind of sharing someone else's post. And these are posted and associated with the profile owner's NFT. And just like an NFT that we're used to, publications also have this idea of a content URI that has associated metadata. So the associated metadata might be something like a title, a description, and an image, or it could be whatever that content needs to be. But the content URI is where all of this actual information about the publication is stored. You also have this idea of a collect module. And this is cool because it has built-in monetization and built-in curation within the platform itself. So I might say, create some cool image and share it on my timeline. And I can say, I want to allow 20 people to collect this. And it will allow essentially 20 people to collect that as an NFT. And then after that, no one else can collect it. You can also obviously sell things in the form of an NFT through the collect module. So you might charge 5 or 10 Matic to allow someone to collect something. Let's say you create a really nice blog post and you spend a lot of time on it. You want to give it away for free, but you also want to give people the opportunity to, I would say, reward you for that work. For those that want to do that, you might say, okay, you can collect this for $5 and I have 50 of them available. And it's not a big barrier to entry. And people that really appreciate you might do that. And anyway, it's all built into the platform, which is pretty cool. And then finally, you also have a follow module. And this, again, is similar to kind of what we already talked about before, where you can attach business logic that will either allow or not allow someone to follow you. And what you end up having is a bunch of these NFTs showing up in your wallet. So I don't know if this is like
Yeah.
a good thing or a bad thing, but yeah, you'll be surprised after like following a bunch of people on OpenSea that you see you have 1 million NFTs. We talked about comments. I think we talked about mirrors. And with that being said, we're going to do a demo. But before we do that, let's see if there's any questions that we can answer real quick.
Yeah, there are a bunch of questions to be honest. So the first is for the GraphQL. Yeah,
Okay, yeah. How does the index update? Does the GraphQL API ever get out of sync with on-chain data? So the GraphQL API is indexing all of the information on-chain via events. So every time a new transaction is submitted, the contract submits an event, the API listens for that event, and then indexes that information. Now, the client application will probably be out of date, just like any API would be out of date if you don't have a listener. I don't know if they have GraphQL subscriptions enabled to listen for real-time updates, but no, I don't think you have to really worry about it being out of sync, because the time between the event and the indexing and the updating of the API is probably like less than a second or something like that. So it's probably not like so negligible it wouldn't be worth worrying about.
nice. So here I also have a follow-up question, and that's it.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, the GraphQL API is querying from a database that is taking all of the information off chain and making it available in a more efficient manner. So the index is updated via any type of transaction, and any transaction that happens, an event is emitted. The listener takes that updated information and stores it, and then makes it available. So the indexer is updated via events.
Nice. And now we have a pretty interesting question.
I mean, your profile can get stolen just like your wallet can get compromised. So anything that can happen with your wallet in Web3 can happen in this regard as well. Yes.
Ah,
So if you
so
like leak your private key or you sign a transaction, just like how people lose their Bored Apes,
ah,
you could lose your lens.
okay, so keep the
But I
private
guess
key
this
off.
has to do with any time you have like yeah, the security vulnerabilities in Web3 still needs some work. You know, this is not a good thing
Yeah,
that can happen for sure.
and yeah. So this is the last.
Webhook APIs. I mean, with Polygon, you can just use ethers to set up a listener for events as well if you're looking for like real time information. Um, And it's not really a REST API call. It's actually, GraphQL, which is different.
Yeah. So yep, all the questions are done. I guess we can move to the demo right now.
Cool. So I'm going to present my screen, and I have a widescreen monitor, so I apologize if this is like too wide, but let me see here.
Let's see what we can do.
What I'm going to try to do is like zoom in as much as possible. Does that look
Cool.
readable?
Yeah, I guess it is.
I'm not very confident in that answer. What about
No,
this?
actually, I guess it.
Can you read this?
Yeah, it's readable. Yeah,
Okay, cool. So
at
yeah,
least from my end, I can.
basically what we want to do is build out like a basic example application. So I'm going to go to the developer garden, the developer docs, and just have these ready for reference. And this workshop is really basic. What we're going to do is create a new Next.js app. We're going to install our dependencies. We're going to query for information, and then we're going to like add some user interface to follow people. So to get started, I'm going to go to my command line. I'm going to go to an empty delete directory, and I'm going to say lens app developer DAO. And this is just going to be like an empty Next.js app, because I like starting from scratch, because I think that sometimes when you
Right.
start from like an existing application, there's a lot of missed context
Yeah.
for me,
Right.
you know? All right, and we're going to be working in pages/index, which is the entry point of the Next.js app.
Next year.
And we're going to be working in a new file that I'm going to call api.js. And for now, those are the only two files that we're going to be working in. Is that readable, by the way? Is this like a good zoom?
Yeah, it's readable actually.
Okay, good. Okay, so now that we've created our app, what we want to do is install Ethers, GraphQL, and Urkel. Ethers is a library that allows you to interact with blockchain protocols, EVM blockchain
Yeah.
protocols. GraphQL is a GraphQL dependency for Urkel, and then Urkel is the GraphQL client. All right. So with those things installed, the first objective is going to be for us to query information from the API. So what we're going to do is go to api.js, and we're going to create something there. But I think we need one more configuration in next.config. And I'm just going to copy and paste this. And what we want to do is like Next.js is very particular about the types of images that it's going to render. So I'm kind of like just making some configuration here that tells Next.js the domains from which I might be rendering images.
Right.
And this is kind of like a Next.js thing and not really a Lens thing. So what we want to do is create the GraphQL client, because I mentioned Lens is a GraphQL API. So we can't just use, well, we could just use something like Fetch, but there's actually much better APIs and libraries that we can use to talk to GraphQL that are specific for GraphQL. And one of the ones I like is Urkel. Another one is Apollo. So what we're going to do is import create client from Urkel. We're going to define our API URL. This is api.lens.dev. This is available in the Lens developer docs where I showed you earlier. We pulled them up. And then we're going to create this variable called client. And the only argument that we're going to pass in for the configuration is the URL. And what you can then do is you can say client.query and pass in a GraphQL query. And that's a pretty nice API, and I like it because it's pretty simple. And that's what we're going to be working with. All right, so now that we've created our API, I need to find the GraphQL queries that we want to interact with. And if I go to the developer docs and I scroll down here to Lens API, you'll see that it has a lot of different API methods that you can use. And most of these are very straightforward, and you can kind of like read the name and understand what's going on. So, for example, explore, you can explore publications with the explore publications query. You can explore profiles with the explore profiles query, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty straightforward to kind of read the names of these different APIs and understand kind of what's going on. The query that we want to work with at first is explore profiles. So all I really need to do is go to explore profiles and literally just copy this query. It's a pretty long
Most of the
query.
work is done.
um, and I'm going to just go here and I'm going to say export const. What is that called again? Explore profiles equal to that query. Now, I'm not really going through and removing any of this information, even though I'm like not really using hardly any of this stuff. I think the only thing I'm really going to be using is like the name, the bio, maybe their profile picture. But like, I'm just, because this is a workshop, I'm not going to deal with it. But like, we're basically returning all of this information and we're not really using it. But like in a production ready app, you would probably limit the response to just the things that you wanted. But it's pretty simple to see that we can just go there, copy it, and we're like ready to go. We also need one more GraphQL query, because after we query for the profiles, we want to maybe then get one publication for each profile and render that on the screen. Because if I go to an app like Linster maybe, which is a front end that's built on Lens, this isn't like an official Lens front end. It's by the Lens team. It's just by the community. You'll see that like you're seeing a feed of people's posts and their information. So I'm kind of like going to construct a feed like this myself by also grabbing the get publications query. So I'm going to go to publication and I'm going to look for get publications. And I'm actually going to go here. Let's see here. I'm just going to copy this here because there's slight difference, because this get publications query is hard coding a profile ID. But
Yeah.
in our example, we actually need that to be a variable. So I'm passing that in as a variable. So slight nuance from their main docs. So now we have two queries, one for exploring profiles and one for getting a publication. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and query that. And I'm going to write this here. Okay, cool. I'm going to write the query starting off from scratch just to kind of see what's going on. So we've imported the client, the GraphQL client, and the explore profiles and get publications query. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have like a use effect hook. And use effect is going to be called right when this application loads. And we're going to create a function called fetch profiles. I can't even spell right now. Cool. And fetch profiles is just going to be a function. And we'll just have like a try catch block here. And we're going to say awaits client.query. We can pass in explore profiles. Promise. And we'll store this in a variable called response maybe. We'll just like log that out. And we'll just try to run this. And I'm sure there's probably like some mistake I made. I have no idea, but we'll try it. That can't be the case. That must be from a different. I think I might have another instance of a similar app running on localhost 3000. Try that again. Okay, cool. We have hello world, but we have some error. So I'm just going to see what's going on there. Guess I should go to my code and see what I did wrong. To promise. There we go. So now we have the response coming back. And what we can do is just like look in there and see that we have data, we have explore profiles, and then we have 25 different profiles. So in just a couple of lines of code, we were able to go ahead and fetch all this, like I would say, rich information from the API.
Yeah.
So we have like a bio for a user. We have their handle, Web3 Academy. We have the metadata.
The whole social profile.
Yeah, basically. It only took a few lines of code to kind of get that information, which is pretty nice. And we didn't have to do anything with like ethers, JS, or any of that stuff. You even have like their profile picture. So we should be able to like just test this out real quick. And there we go. So we have the information coming back from the API. What we want to do next is render that information to the screen instead of hello world. So I'm going to, I guess one thing I'm going to do is first copy this more built out fetch profiles function and walk through that for a second. As opposed to just getting the data like we did before, I have a new like function, I guess you could say, where I'm defining a new variable called profile data. And what we're going to do is like map over every single item in this array of items. And we're going to do some like data transformation. One thing that we're going to do is get the first publication for each user. So here we're calling another GraphQL client query. And we're going to go ahead and get publications for each user. And we're only going to ask for one publication because we only want to show like one for each user in this view. And later we're going to drill down and get more of those. And then once we have that information, we're going to do some transformation on their picture because sometimes the picture comes back as an IPFS hash, and we need to actually have an HTTP endpoint for that. So nothing really like lens specific there. It's more just getting the data ready to be viewed on the screen. So that's getting and transforming the data. For the user interface, we're going to, instead of returning a div, we're going to map over the profiles. We're going to create a link that is for the profile ID. We're going to render their profile picture, their name, and their content for the publication. So we now have about 60 lines of code. So if I save that, we go back. I know I need to set the state. So I don't have any state set up right now. So I guess let me go ahead and just see what I missed. Looks like this line here. So we're going to have a profiles variable set to an empty array and then set profiles to update those profiles. And there we go. So now when the app loads, we're getting all of the information and we're rendering it. Now the design isn't that great because we don't have a ton of time here, but but
Yeah.
we at least have it working. And you could see it's almost like if you look at the data, and we don't have the design yet, obviously, that these people do, but we're kind of like getting there already, building something like that. The next thing I want to do is like if I click on a profile, I want to navigate to that profile. And right now it's just like a 404. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder in the pages directory called profile. And here we'll create a new file called id.js. And we're going to continue with this workshop. And by the way, like feel free to go and do this workshop and leave any GitHub issues or questions, and I'll be happy to try to help you out down the road because I am rushing through this a little bit. What we want to do is create a new query for Git profile, and this is going to be what happens when someone navigates to an individual profile. We want to get all of the information about that user. So if I go to Linster and I go to like login, I'll do all that real quick. And I go to my profile, you'll see that we have a lot more information. You know, we have our feed, we have our username and the number of followers. So you can get all of that by using this new Git profile query. And I'm going to just copy this. This was copied from the docs as well. And like the last query that we did, we're actually not hard coding a profile ID. We're using a variable. So I'm going to go to api.js and add this one here. And the last thing that we're going to do is go to that new file that we created, like id.js, and we are going to drop in all this code, and I'll walk through some of it, but we are running low on time and we still have some questions and stuff. So what's going on in this file? Well, we also need to grab one more thing, which is the ABI. So I have a link to the ABI. It's really just the deployed contract address. I think the ABI might be available in their docs too, but you can always go to something like Etherscan or Polygon Scan, go to the contracts, scroll down here to the ABI and just copy it. So I'm going to create a new file called abi.json, paste it there, format it. Now we have our ABI. So let's walk through this file now. We have our imports, nothing really interesting going on there different other than we're now going to actually be using ethers because we're going to be sending a transaction to the network for following a user. We have our ABI, and then we're defining the contract address. So this is the contract address that you would get from the docs if I go to where we were earlier, deployed contract addresses. So that's the proxy. We have a use effect hook, which is similar to what we've done in the past with fetching profiles. Instead, here we just have a single profile, and we're going to be fetching it based on this ID that comes off of the router. So if we go to our app, we'll see that we're at /profile/this ID. We have some logic to let someone connect their wallet. We have a function for fetching an individual profile, very similar to the last query where we're kind of like calling the GraphQL query. We're doing some manipulation with the data as it comes back, and then we're setting it to the local state. But yeah, as you can see, it's actually like working here. And when the app loads, it's now loading a profile. So what I should be able to do is actually go here and like navigate to a new profile and do that. And if I want to follow them, I can click follow user. And if I'm not already following them, it should allow me to follow them. And I think that is all I'm going to present today, because that was quite a bit in a short amount of time. And I
Yeah.
apologize if I was running through that code too quickly, but I would say that hopefully just the general idea got through. And if you were interested in diving in more, I would go back through that tutorial. It's completely available, open source, and you're welcome to try it out.
So that's an awesome introduction to the Lens protocol, to be honest. So we don't have any questions for like the code side, but a general question. Okay.
That's a really good question. I have no idea what the answer to that is. Um, so I'll have to actually dive into to answer that. I guess it would be the same answer would be like, is there a way for two people to control a single wallet? And I mean, theoretically, yes, but how would you do that securely? I don't really know.
Nice. So if anyone have any other question, and yep, what about the multisig?
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. But a multi-sig would be more like, well, I guess you could do a multi-sig and say you only need one signer or something. I don't know. Yeah, let me pass in the GitHub link. I passed the comments in the private chat if you want to post it in the public
Yeah.
chat. Yeah, that might be something I try to play around with just out of curiosity with them. With if I can get like an extra lens handle, I might just buy one off of OpenSea and try that out, because I have my own personal one, but I don't know if I would want to experiment with it.
Awesome. So yeah, the link for the Git repo is over there in the chats. You can check it out. And yep, do we have any other questions? I guess we don't. So that's an awesome introduction to the Lens protocol. Thank you, Nade, for having for being here and introducing us to the Lens protocol and a quick code. And yeah, what do you think is the next way for that option? We got a question.
I think just the combination of accessibility and scalability and making those things actually work at scale, because like we're seeing more accessibility via gasless transactions, meaning anyone in the world can participate without having to actually have any money, which is great. But like, let's say we decided to onboard 1 billion users today, like the the applications wouldn't scale right now due to the nature of
Yeah,
how blockchain architectures, like the state of current blockchain architectures, they're just not ready for that amount of usage. In fact, we see most
yeah,
of the like blockchains that are regarded as performant, or the ones that are the most scalable, at only like a few thousand transactions per second. But traditional databases are handling 100 million operations per second, for a single application in some cases. So if you kind of compare the amount of throughput that Twitter or TikTok probably gets, if you tried to throw that much bandwidth at a blockchain, it just wouldn't work, at least not today. So scalability of the actual primitives, protocols themselves is for sure, but also the scalability of the gasless transaction implementation today, because all of these gasless transactions are actually being subsidized by someone. And if you have like 10 or 20 or 30,000 transactions per hour, like that might be sustainable.
yeah.
But if you have 1 billion, that might start costing like tens of millions of dollars, like just to subsidize. So like, those two things I think are the main barriers to adoption. And then the last one is for sure the combination of like security and wallet UX. It's just not a good
Right.
experience for most people that are familiar with like OAuth with Google sign in or Facebook sign in. You just click a button and it works. And like, you don't have to worry about your identity being taken by someone else and all of your money being like taken away. Like, there's just stuff that you don't have to consider in the traditional tech world that we still haven't figured out yet.
Awesome. So, yep. Thank you for being here, sir,
Yeah, thank you for
and
having
thank you
me. I
everyone
enjoyed
for
being
being
here. Is this
here.
being recorded?
Yeah, it will be open over here only. It's not recorded as of now, actually.
Okay, okay, cool. No worries. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for having me, and I
Oh,
appreciate everyone that stopped in today.
yeah. See you guys soon, and do subscribe the Developer DAO YouTube channel for more series like this.